Daniel Mercer thought he had reached the peak of success in numbers, fame, and billion-dollar contracts. But an unexpected encounter in the hospital revealed his greatest secret. For 6 years, he had a son who had been raised in silence. From a man who only knew how to build high walls for ambition, Daniel was forced to learn how to build bridges to his son's heart, the woman who once loved him, and the very self he had lost. This is a story about family and a journey of redemption, proving that sometimes a second chance is the greatest miracle of all. The 38th floor of the glass tower in downtown Seattle gleamed like a beacon amid the gray, rainy afternoon. Transparent walls opened to the city's panorama, Elliott Bay swallowed in mist, white ferries cutting quietly through the waves, and in the distance, the shadow of Mount Rainier blurred in clouds. Inside the spacious boardroom, the air was so thick it felt like every breath had been packed into numbers and clauses. Daniel Mercer sat at the head of the long walnut table, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a perfectly tailored black suit. Light reflected off thin glasses, concealing the deep blue eyes now fixed motionless on a thick stack of documents. Before him were 12 tense faces, men and women in expensive suits, CEOs and investors, representatives of tech conglomerates across the West Coast. They waited for him to nod, sign, and seal a deal worth tens of millions of dollars. Mr. Mercer, a silver-haired man, began, his voice carrying a Wall Street edge rather than the Pacific Northwest. If you sign today, the entire EdTech ecosystem will change. This isn't just a merger, this is history. Daniel lifted his gaze, meeting his eyes. His voice was low, steady, each word landing on the table with weight. You're asking me to sell my company's soul. Yes, the numbers on paper are impressive, but behind them lies everything I've spent 6 years resisting, turning an idea born to help people into a soulless money printing machine. A ripple of murmurs swept through the table. Some frowned, others smirked. Charles Henderson, CEO of the Partner Corporation, adjusted his Italian tie, striving for warmth in his tone. Daniel, this deal will make you the youngest billionaire in the Seattle tech corridor. Your shareholders, my shareholders, Daniel cut him off, rising to his feet, trusted me because I promised to build something of real value, not to let a giant corporation buy it, break it apart, and erase it like dozens of others. I didn't build Mercer Tech to become a line on a quarterly profit report. Chairs shifted, sighs filled the air. But Daniel's mind was set. He closed the file and laid down his fountain pen. The answer is no. Mercer Tech will remain independent. The boardroom door shut behind him, protests echoing. The carpeted hallway was so silent that the sound of his leather shoes struck in a steady rhythm. But inside, everything was chaos. He entered his private office, shut the door, and loosened his tie. A heavy breath escaped, as if for years the knot had bound his neck and heart. He opened the bottom drawer, the one his assistant never touched. Beneath a tangle of USB drives and old business cards lay a photo with worn edges. Rachel. In it, she wore a simple white dress they had grabbed from a bargain store, her hair loose, her smile radiant. Her hand rested over his chest and heart, while his eyes looked at her as if she were life's only answer. They had been barely in their 20s, just moved into a small Capitol Hill apartment, believing that they could change the world with love and a few dreams. We'll create something miraculous together, he had whispered in her ear during their first dance. In that empty room filled only with cardboard boxes. As long as we don't change each other, she replied, her eyes sparkling. But he had been the one to change. The photo trembled in his hand as memories surged back. Nights Rachel waited for him, dinners gone cold. The times she wanted to share stories from the hospital, but he only nodded absently, eyes glued to the laptop. Arguments, tears. Then one night she said, "You're not here anymore. I can't keep living with a ghost." That day, Daniel chose silence. He let her walk away. 2 weeks later, he filed for divorce, convincing himself that setting her free was the last act of love he could give. 6 years passed. His company soared, and the press hailed him as the rising star of Northwest Tech. But when night fell, all he had was emptiness in his vast penthouse overlooking the harbor. He returned the photo to the drawer, closing it slowly. Outside, Seattle roared on. Ferry horns, rain striking glass, the city alive. Yet to Daniel, it all sounded distant, muffled. Success he had, power he had, but what mattered most, he had lost long ago. Daniel leaned back in the leather chair, eyes shut. Inside Mercer Tech's tower, everything radiated perfection. Soft LED lights, a faint warmth of wood, imported carpets. But to him, it all felt like a stage too carefully dressed for an audience who no longer wanted to watch. A knock came. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Marcus Delgado is waiting to go with you to the launch party." His assistant's voice echoed from the intercom. Daniel hesitated briefly, hand gripping his shirt button tight. He rose, putting back on the armor of a businessman. Black suit, silk tie, cold eyes. The mirror reflected a tall, handsome man with a sharp, unyielding face that betrayed no cracks. But Daniel knew in his own eyes he was a stranger. 6 years ago, Rachel had teased, "You always tie your tie too tight, like you're strangling yourself." Today, the feeling returned in full. The sleek Tesla sped down Seattle's rain-slicked streets, carrying him to an upscale rooftop restaurant. Mercer Tech's celebration awaited, with fine wine, jazz music, and a gallery of familiar faces from the tech scene. Camera flashes popped as he stepped inside. Daniel, Marcus Delgado, close partner and rare friend, spread his arms. In his 40s, the Latin man had bright eyes and a warm smile, so unlike the icy executives in the boardroom. "Tonight we celebrate, amigo." Mercer Tech just made Titan swallow its pride, a historic turning point. Laughter and the clink of champagne glasses filled the air. Daniel raised his glass, forcing a smile. He knew he had to play the role of the triumphant founder, leading a new empire. But inside, the sweet wine tasted like cold metal. He slipped out to the balcony. Below, the city glittered. Cranes at the port, headlights trailing the freeway, the Space Needle piercing rainy skies. All shining, yet to him like light on a still lake, beautiful but lifeless. Marcus joined, carrying 2 more glasses. "You look like a man who just won the lottery but lost the ticket," he joked. Daniel let out a faint laugh, but in his mind another voice echoed. The man Rachel once loved had died 6 years ago, in a lawyer's office, when he signed the divorce papers. "Just thinking," Daniel replied. Marcus patted his shoulder. "Dangerous. Overthinking makes men miserable." They chuckled lightly, but the laughter broke as Marcus suddenly clutched his chest, face ashen. His glass slipped, shattering on the tiles. "Daniel," he gasped, then collapsed. The scene unfolded like a fast-forwarded reel. Shouts, someone calling 911, jazz music cut off. Daniel dropped to his knees, hands that once typed code, now pressing down on his friend's chest. He shouted, "Call an ambulance, now!" Amid the chaos, for the first time in years, Daniel's blood boiled not for a contract but a life. When the ambulance arrived, he rode inside, gripping Marcus's hand. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights flickered. In that moment, another memory struck. His father lying still in a Tacoma hospital when Daniel was 12. The boy had clutched his father's hand, trembling, begging for a miracle that never came. "Don't go, Marcus," Daniel whispered. "Don't leave me like my father did." Evergreen Medical Center loomed ahead, white lights glaring, green sign glowing against the rainy night. As the doors swung open, Daniel stepped out, heart racing. He had no idea that inside this antiseptic, sterile place, his buried past of 6 years was about to awaken. A figure crossed his sight. Black hair tied neatly back, pale blue scrubs, purposeful steps under the harsh fluorescent lights. The glow carved out a face he once knew by heart. Rachel Lawson. The world fell silent. Sirens, intercoms, hurried footsteps all faded, only a few dozen feet away, and his eyes locked on hers. 6 years collapsed into a single second. The woman who once cooked dinner in their tiny apartment and held him in a stormy night now stood firm, composed. Rachel turned, and their eyes met. For an instant, Daniel saw shock flicker, then vanish behind a mask of professionalism. She kept walking, as though he were just another stranger wandering the hallway. But Daniel knew the real storm had just begun. Fine wine swirled in fragile crystal glasses. Golden lights washed over a table piled with fresh seafood, fragrant grilled beef, and expensive little pastries that hardly anyone touched. Mercer Tech's night party was held on the rooftop of a luxury downtown Seattle hotel, where people in suits and evening gowns gathered, raising glasses and laughing as if the city belonged to them alone. Daniel Mercer entered, his tall figure standing out among the crowd. Cameras rose, and reporters jostled to ask about the deal he had just refused. He only offered a forced smile and short answers, then slipped away like a big fish swimming through a sea of people, unconcerned with what anyone thought. Amid the soft jazz, he felt as though he stood in a play where every character knew their lines. The CEO, the investor, the talented engineer. Only he was the actor whose heart was hollow. The hero of the evening is here. Marcus Delgado appeared with a radiant smile and a wineglass in hand. His way of speaking warmed people, a hint of Spanish in his words, a loud laugh to dispel tension. Marcus had once been the only one to sit for hours in a small bar with Daniel, discussing dreams of making educational software for poor children. You just kicked Titan Corp right out the door. Tomorrow the papers will write, Daniel Mercer, the man who dared to say no to millions. Marcus raised his glass, and I'll write, my crazy friend still has a heart. Laughter rang around them, a few warm handshakes. Daniel raised his glass too, but when the wine touched his lips, the sweet bitterness turned into a harsh metallic tang. He turned away, letting Marcus mingle with the crowd, offering praise. Outside on the balcony, the night wind blew strongly, carrying moisture from the bay. The city below looked like a gigantic carpet of light. Blinking cars, the Space Needle standing silent in the rainy sky, white ferries heading into port. Daniel set his glass on the railing, leaned on his hand, letting the music and laughter behind him grow distant. He remembered rain-soaked evenings years ago when he and Rachel had only an old chair, a cheap pizza box, but laughter that filled the apartment. Marcus found him, still holding 2 glasses. You look like someone who won the jackpot but lost the ticket. What's wrong? Daniel shrugged lightly. Just thinking. Dangerous. Marcus laughed, downing his glass. Don't overthink. We did the impossible, Dan. You have to enjoy it. Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, Marcus suddenly froze. The glass in his hand slipped and shattered on the floor. His hand clutched his chest, his face drained of color. Daniel, Marcus stammered. For an instant, the whole world slowed. The music, the laughter, the rain, everything blurred, leaving only the sound of Daniel's pounding heart. He dropped down, catching his friend. Marcus, look at me. Can you hear me? The man trembled, his body heavy in Daniel's arms. The crowd stood stunned, then screams rose. Someone called 911. Someone else pressed a tablecloth to Marcus's sweaty forehead. The CPR skills learned at college sprang into instinct. Daniel compressed the chest, counting the rhythm, blowing air. In his eyes, Marcus blurred with an old memory. Another hospital, another bed, his father lying motionless, the same cold white lights, the same crushing helplessness. Don't go, Marcus, Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. You have to stay. Hear me, you have to stay. When the ambulance arrived, Daniel followed, ignoring the party, the reporters, and the CEO image he had cultivated. In the ambulance, the defibrillator's steady tone mixed with the wail of sirens. Daniel gripped his friend's hand, whispering like a prayer to a god he had long abandoned. Evergreen Medical Center appeared bright on a rainy night. The doors opened, and the medical staff rushed out with a stretcher. Daniel stepped in, drenched, heart racing. He had no idea that in this same bright, sterile hallway, fate had arranged for a meeting even more shocking than death. The emergency doors swung open, and a cold fluorescent glare poured in. The antiseptic smell hit his nose, the wheels of gurneys clattered on tile. Daniel followed close, as if sucked into the chaotic vortex. Doctors and nurses swarmed Marcus, shouting numbers for blood pressure and oxygen levels. Are you family? Anursa blocked him. A close friend. Daniel choked, then nodded vigorously. "Yes, I'll wait where?" "ICU waiting room, 3rd floor. We'll update you as soon as we have news." He stood frozen, watching the stretcher whisk away, the doors closing with an emotionless click. The familiar feeling returned, helplessness, the fear of losing someone dear. This time it wasn't his father, but his last remaining friend. The ICU waiting room felt like a parallel world. Rows of plastic chairs, a vending machine clanking. A few people bowed in prayer. Daniel sat down, his suit still wet with rain, hair disheveled. He leaned his head against the wall, his palms still numb from touching Marcus's cold skin. Minutes stretched like hours. He opened his phone, but didn't know who to call. Besides Marcus's number, his contacts were only colleagues, investors, the press people who could not understand his burden. For the first time in years, he felt truly alone. Footsteps approached. A middle-aged woman in a white coat came over. Her nameplate read, Dr. Annika Shah. She removed her mask, her voice warm but decisive. "Mr. Mercer, your friend was in critical condition. We restored a pulse. He needs monitoring for the next 24 hours, but his situation is stable for now." Daniel sprang up, letting out a breath as if he had just inhaled air after hours. "May I see him?" "Only immediate family." "But..." Dr. Shah studied his eyes, then softened. "You may go in for a few minutes if you are close." "Room 314. Daniel nodded repeatedly, thanking her. The doctor walked away, leaving him stunned with overwhelming relief. He headed toward the ICU down the bright corridors. And then he saw her. Rachel Lawson, in pale blue scrubs, hair tied neatly, holding a clipboard. She spoke with a young nurse. Her expression was professional, and her tone was calm but authoritative. At that sight, Daniel froze. 6 years buried, 6 years he thought were covered by deals, stocks, and titles, fell apart with a single look. She looked up. Their eyes met. A heartbeat skipped. The world stopped. The monitor beeps, the intercom calling doctors, the wheels of gurneys, everything dissolved, leaving only that gaze. In that brief instant, Daniel saw in her eyes a flash, astonishment, a tremor, as if both their memories flooded back at once. He saw the wedding smile, the eyes brimming when they promised to change the world together. But then the professional mask slid back on. Rachel inhaled, her gaze sharpening. She glanced at her clipboard, turned, and walked away as if he did not exist. Daniel stood motionless, his hand clenched unconsciously, fingernails digging into the flesh. It felt like someone had sliced into an old scar. A wound he thought had healed bled anew. He wanted to call her name, but his throat tightened. Only Rachel's footsteps receded down the corridor, leaving him a void wider than the rainy night outside. In the ICU room, Marcus lay still, tubes and wires everywhere. Daniel sat down beside him, taking his friend's hand. He whispered, "You must not leave me. I still have so much to fix. Not just with you." Beyond the glass, Rachel passed by again. Daniel watched her go, his heart trembling. On a rainy Seattle night, he understood that the past had never left him. Perhaps fate had brought her back not merely to remind him of his sins, but to force him to face them. Evergreen Medical Center was unlike any office building Daniel had ever known. Here, the lights weren't meant to glorify power or profit, but to illuminate every small detail on a patient's body. The smell of antiseptic, the squeak of gurney wheels, and the rubber-soled steps of nurses echoed down the corridors, composing a symphony no one wanted to hear, but everyone had to learn. Daniel leaned against the wall outside the ICU, his heart still racing. Marcus lay inside, the monitor beeping steadily, his breath heavy but stable. Just hours earlier, they had been raising glasses amid laughter. Now, that fragile life was sustained only by oxygen tubes and the hands of doctors. The door opposite swung open. A group of nurses walked out among them. Rachel. She walked briskly, clutching a file of charts. Her hair was tied back, stray strands clinging to her forehead with sweat. That face etched deep in Daniel's memory now carried a strength he had never seen before. 6 years ago, Rachel had been the gentle wife, sometimes fiery, but always warm. Today, before him stood a resolute nurse, No longer the woman who waited for him every night, but someone who bore the responsibility of saving lives every day. Daniel wanted to call out, but his throat was parched. Guilt strangled him, as though he no longer had the right to say her name. Rachel paused briefly when she noticed him. Her once warm brown eyes were now veiled with ice. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was low, sharp as a blade. "I came with Marcus," Daniel answered softly, his hand instinctively brushing his pocket. "He had a heart attack right at the party. I couldn't leave him alone." Rachel gave a slight nod, her face betraying no emotion. "He's lucky. Not everyone has a friend beside them who knows CPR." A silence stretched between them. Daniel searched her eyes, trying to find the spark of the woman who had once shared every dream with him. But all he saw was caution the kind people build as walls against those who once caused them pain. "Rachel," he whispered, the name slipping out, both familiar and distant. "Don't." She cut him off, her voice calm but firm. "There's nothing we need to say here. Take care of your friend. I have other patients." She turned, her rubber-soled shoes tapping evenly against the tile. Daniel watched her go, his heart tearing anew. 6 years, he thought he had grown used to loss, but truthfully, loss never becomes familiar. It only waits for a moment to erupt, to burn through every pretense of composure. He sank into the waiting chair, his head in his hands. On the wall, a small TV broadcast the evening news, his name mentioned as Seattle's symbol of success. Daniel laughed bitterly. Success, the word rang hollow, when the one person he had ever wanted to share it with had turned her back. The night in the hospital stretched longer than Daniel had ever known. No clinking glasses, no hollow laughter of networking events. Instead, the hiss of ventilators, urgent intercom calls, a child's cry drifting down from the pediatric ward above. Every sound reminded him that here, lives teetered on the edge by the second. He paced the corridors, knowing he couldn't sleep or go home, partly because of Marcus and Rachel. Her image haunted him, eyes steady but tired, steps purposeful yet weighted with sorrow. At a hallway corner, he suddenly re-encountered her. She had just stepped out of pediatrics, holding a paper cup of coffee. Her face showed traces of fatigue after long hours, but under the harsh hospital lights, Daniel still recognized the beauty that had once undone him. "You're still here?" Rachel spoke first, her tone clipped. "Marcus hasn't woken up. I can't leave." Daniel tried to keep his voice steady. "And I can't sleep either." Rachel gave a slight nod. No comment. She leaned against the wall, sipped her coffee, and checked messages on her phone. But even as she pretended not to notice, Daniel saw her hand trembling around the cup. "Rachel," he began, hesitant as if each word were an obstacle. "I didn't expect to see you here. It's been 6 years, long enough for each of us to have our own lives." She cut in. Her voice was even, but her eyes, glimmering in the hallway light, betrayed something deeper: pain, anger, or perhaps a longing she refused to admit. Daniel wanted to say he missed her, that every triumph felt hollow without her witness. But he knew those words would sound only like late excuses. He drew a breath, choosing another way. "You've become a nurse." Rachel looked faintly surprised, then let out a bitter smile. "Does that surprise you? I told you once I wanted to work with children, to make a real difference. Not just add numbers to your spreadsheets." Daniel lowered his head. The words struck deep, because they were true. While he built an empire of software, Rachel had chosen another path: quiet, steadfast, tied to the hospital and the fragile lives that needed a warm hand more than a new algorithm. "I've thought a lot about what you said that night," Daniel said slowly. "You told me I only built walls, not bridges. You were right. These past 6 years, I've only built them higher." Rachel held his gaze, her eyes softening for a fleeting moment. But then she straightened, covering it. "We can't go back to the past. What matters is how you live from now on." She dropped her coffee cup into the trash, turned, and walked away. Her pale blue scrubs blended into the sea of uniforms, leaving Daniel standing alone, heart hollow. At that moment, He understood that meeting Rachel again was not meant to soothe his memories, but to force him to face his greatest failure. Not failure in business, but in holding on to the person he once loved most. Through the ICU window, he saw Marcus lying still. Rachel continued her shift somewhere in this hospital, tending to fragile lives. And he, once a man who thought he held the world, could only stand behind glass, wishing he could touch her life again. The next morning, Seattle drizzled as always. Fine drops slid down the hospital's glass panes, reflecting the grey light of the northwest sky. Daniel sat still in the ICU waiting room, a cup of coffee long gone cold in his hand. Marcus remained unconscious but stable. Dr. Shah had said he would need several more days of monitoring. He might recover, but complications couldn't be ruled out. Daniel tried to read his work emails on his phone, but the words danced into nonsense. All he could hear was the echo of last night, Rachel's steady footsteps, her cold voice. What matters is how you live from now on. He rose and entered the elevator as if pulled by some invisible force. He didn't know where he wanted to go, only that he couldn't sit still. His finger stopped at the button. 7. Pediatric ward. He pressed it. When the doors opened, he stepped into another world. No more sterile white corridors here. The walls were alive with painted sailboats, hot air balloons, and playful dragons soaring across skies of color. Smiling children filled the photos on the walls, many bald from treatment, but their eyes shining with faith. The sounds were different, too. Instead of monitors, there was laughter, storytime voices, and the faint notes of a small piano from the playroom. Daniel strolled, like a stranger stumbling into an undiscovered land. A girl of about 8, head wrapped in a pink scarf, peeked out of a room, smiling and waving. He froze for a beat, then waved back. Warmth spread through him momentarily, a softness he hadn't felt in years. A voice drifted from the end of the hall, reading aloud. Female, low, warm, and so familiar that his chest tightened. He moved closer, each step heavy, until he reached the wide glass window of the playroom. Inside, Rachel Lawson sat cross-legged on a colorful rug. 6 children gathered around her. In her hands was a picture book, her voice rising and shifting with each character. But Princess Maya wasn't afraid. She looked the trembling dragon in the eye and said, "What makes you different? Maybe exactly what makes you special." The children giggled. A boy with nasal oxygen tubes asked quickly, "Then did the dragon dare to breathe fire, Miss Rachel?" Rachel smiled, her eyes bright. Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. Courage means doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Daniel held his breath at the doorway. The sight pierced through him. Rachel in a circle of children, light on her face, her gentle smile more radiant now because it carried strength. He remembered the nights long ago when she spoke of her dream of working with children and helping them heal. He hadn't listened, lost in spreadsheets and contracts. A girl with a headscarf looked up, asking innocently, "Miss Rachel, can people change, really change?" Rachel hesitated a beat, turning a page, her eyes distant. When she answered, her voice was soft but firm. "People change every day. We make mistakes, we hurt others, but every morning we have the chance to become a better version of ourselves. The only thing is, we have to prove it with actions, not just promises." The words struck Daniel like a blade in the chest. He wanted to step in, to say, "I was wrong, but I want to prove it now." Yet his feet felt glued to the floor. And then, a small figure appeared. A boy of about 5, with sun-kissed skin, lightly curled hair, and large black eyes bright as glass. He clutched a plastic dinosaur, stepping into the hall, his gaze locking on Daniel's. The world froze. Daniel saw himself as a child in the boy's eyes, the same curiosity, seriousness, and silent watchfulness. "Are you looking for someone, sir?" the boy asked politely, like a little grown-up. Daniel dropped to one knee, heart pounding. "I was just walking around." "And you? Who are you here with?" "I'm here with my mom. She works here. She's the best nurse in the world." The boy grinned, showing a chipped baby tooth. "My name is Ethan Lawson. What's yours?" The name thundered through Daniel like a bolt. He swallowed, forcing his voice steady. "I'm Daniel." "Daniel." Ethan nodded, approving. That's a nice name. Want to meet my mom? She's reading about a dragon. The small hand suddenly slipped into Daniel's, tugging him toward the door. His heart roared. Every step weighted with 6 years of buried past crashing down. Inside, Rachel looked up and froze. Ethan was leading Daniel by the hand into the room. The book slipped from her grasp, her face paling. The room stilled. The children giggled, still caught in the story of the timid dragon, unaware of the storm that had just entered. But Rachel stood rigid, her eyes falling to her son's hand clutching Daniel's, then rising to the man she had spent 6 years trying to forget. "Kids, why don't you see if Nurse Green has the new coloring sets?" Rachel's voice rang calm, astonishingly so. The children scampered out in seconds, leaving the room with only 3 people. Ethan looked up at his mother. "Mama, I met Mr. Daniel in the hallway. I asked him to listen to the dragon story." Rachel forced a smile for her son, then turned to Daniel, her eyes sharp as ice. "Thank you for bringing my child in, but you don't belong here." Daniel drew a deep breath. "Rachel, the boy, Ethan, he's my son, isn't he?" A heavy silence fell. Rachel's body stiffened, her hands clutching the dropped book. Her eyes flared with anger, then cooled into composure. "That's none of your concern. Go back to your world, Daniel." "I counted the time," Daniel said, his voice trembling but firm. "The last night before you left, the timing matches. You were pregnant, and you never told me." Rachel turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You chose the company. You chose to leave me. What reason did I have to pull you back in?" Daniel stepped forward, voice breaking. "Do you think I'd have left you alone? If I'd known you were carrying our child, everything would have been different." Rachel laughed bitterly, the sound cutting deep. "Different how? You'd skip one deal, work only 18 hours a day instead of 20. Or would you look at me with that exhausted gaze, as if I were the burden? I didn't need a reluctant husband, and I sure didn't need a half-present father for my child." Ethan glanced between them, wide-eyed and confused. "Mama, did Mr. Daniel do something wrong?" Rachel bent down, wrapping an arm around him. "No, sweetheart. He's an old friend of Mama's. Go outside for a moment, Ethan. Mama needs to talk to him." The boy nodded, but not before casting Daniel a curious look that stabbed his heart so familiar, like staring into a mirror of his childhood. When the door shut, Rachel dropped the mask. Her eyes brimmed with tears, though her voice stayed firm. "Don't go near him, Daniel. For 6 years, I've built a world of stability for my son, no broken promises, no nights waiting at the door. I won't let you shatter that." Daniel's voice cracked. "I don't want to break it. I want to be his father." "Rachel, please." Too late. Tears streamed unchecked, but she didn't wipe them. "You had your chance. You chose ambition. I chose to protect my child from disappointment." Daniel fell silent, every defense dissolved. Only the raw truth remained. He had lost the chance when he signed those divorce papers. From the hallway, Ethan's laughter with the nurses floated in. That innocent sound stabbed Daniel deeper than any blade. He stood still, watching Rachel wipe her tears, watching the door where his son had disappeared. A gulf stretched between him and the family that should have been his. He stepped back, whispering, "If I ever have the chance to prove it with actions, I won't waste it again." Rachel said nothing. She turned, picking up the book, her voice trembling. "Leave me be, Daniel." Daniel walked out into the hall, his heart heavy. Yet in that pain, a quiet resolve began to burn. He didn't know how, but he would fight to find his place beside his son. This time, not with promises, only with presence, one small act at a time, one day after another. Late afternoon, a rare shaft of sunlight slipped through the pediatric ward's windows, spilling gold across the long corridor. Daniel stood in the corner, watching Ethan's tiny footsteps darting outside the playroom. The boy was showing Nurse Green his scribbled dinosaur drawing, his voice bursting with excitement. "This is a hospital for dragons. It has a special room for flying dragons and a big pool for water dragons." Nurse Green laughed, praising him as a little genius. Daniel's chest warmed from afar as if he were watching his younger self sketch spaceship models in pencil on school paper. Ethan spotted him, His dark eyes lit up with curiosity, and without hesitation, he ran over, thrusting the drawing forward. "Mr. Daniel, look. This is the elevator for giant dragons. Do you think it's big enough?" Daniel crouched to his level, studying the childish but astonishingly creative lines. He swallowed, forcing his voice steady. "I think it will fit, and maybe I even know how to make it stronger." Ethan squealed. "You like building stuff too?" Daniel nodded slightly, his throat tight. "When I was your age, I drew a lot of things just like you." At that moment, Daniel's is not powerful at that moment. Dannon, who had him in the flesh for the first time. The boy resembled him uncannily, the serious eyes, the focus, even the little furrow of his brow when deep in thought. "Sweetheart, come here." Rachel appeared at the far end of the corridor, holding patient charts. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with caution. Ethan ran to her, proudly showing the drawing. "Mama, Mr. Daniel said the dragon elevator will fit." Rachel froze briefly but forced a smile for her son. "That's great. Now go to the reading room. Mama will join you soon." When Ethan left, only the two adults remained. The tension between them was taut as a string about to snap. Rachel folded her arms, facing Daniel. "Why are you still here?" Daniel drew a deep breath. "I can't pretend I don't know, Rachel. That boy, he's my son." Her face flinched, but quickly hardened. "You have no right to claim him. I've raised him for 6 years alone. You did not give a drop of sweat. He carries my name. He is my life." Daniel's voice broke. "I didn't know. If I'd known you were pregnant, so what?" Rachel cut him off, her eyes reddening. "You'd sign fewer contracts? You'd lift your head from the computer to ask if I was tired. Daniel, you gave me the answer last night. The company mattered more than family. I couldn't let my child live that way." Her words sliced like knives. Daniel wanted to argue, to promise he would have been different, but he knew it was useless. The past couldn't be rewritten. He whispered only, "I'm sorry, for missing it all, for making you carry it alone." Rachel turned away, her voice trembling. "Sorry doesn't erase 6 years. Leave us in peace." Daniel stood frozen, watching her back recede. Pain surged in his chest, but beneath it, a small flame burned. This time, he wouldn't give up. Through action day by day, he would prove that he deserved the word father. That night, Daniel returned to his penthouse. Seattle stretched out beneath him, towers glowing, ferries crossing the bay, Mount Rainier shrouded in clouds. Yet the vast apartment was terrifyingly empty. He opened a bottle of wine and poured it into a crystal, but abandoned it after a sip. What he longed for wasn't wine or city lights, but Ethan's laughter and Rachel's resolute gaze. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. Emails flooded the screen: investment invitations, board meeting schedules, proposals for expansion into Asia. Daniel shut them all. He opened a blank document and began typing words he had never imagined writing. "Ethan, my son, if one day you read this, know that I lost 6 years with you, not because I didn't love you, but because I was blind and chose the wrong path. Now I want to begin again, not with promises, but with each day by your side." His hands trembled, but for the first time in years, he wrote for a child, not for shareholders or journalists, his child. The next day, Daniel returned to the hospital, heading to pediatrics. He didn't approach Rachel right away. Instead, he lingered outside the playroom, where Ethan was stacking blocks with friends. The boy laughed brightly, explaining his dinosaur base with lively gestures. Daniel just watched, a bittersweet swell filling his chest. After a while, Ethan ran out and spotted him. "Mr. Daniel, come see." The boy tugged him inside, showing a tall tower of wooden blocks. "This is the lookout tower for dragons to watch people, but it must be strong, or the dragon will fall." Daniel knelt, adjusted a few pieces, and shored it with smaller blocks. Ethan's eyes widened. "Wow, you're good. Are you an engineer too?" Daniel chuckled, voice tight. "Yeah, I once dreamed of being an engineer." In that game, Daniel suddenly understood. Being a father wasn't just a title, but a presence kneeling to his child's level, listening, building worlds together, something he had never done in 6 years. Rachel appeared at the doorway, her face unreadable. She saw Daniel and Ethan laughing, the small hand resting on the large one. For a moment, her eyes softened, then immediately turned cold. "Ethan, it's time for your medicine," she said. The boy pouted. "Mama, I'm playing with Mr. Daniel. You'll see him tomorrow," she soothed, then looked at Daniel with an unmistakable warning. "Don't cross the line." Daniel nodded, accepting. He rose, watching his son run to his mother, his heart aching yet resolute. He knew he had only just taken the first steps toward redemption. It would not be easy. It might cost him years of patience. But he was ready. As Rachel and Ethan disappeared down the hall, Daniel whispered, like a vow, "My son, I'll be here. I won't miss it again." Outside the hospital windows, Seattle rain still fell. But inside Daniel, a small light had begun to shine. By late afternoon, the hospital cafeteria was its own world. Gone was the lunchtime bustle. Only a few doctors grabbed quick meals before their shifts, and a handful of family members slumped over cheap coffee cups. Neon lights glared down on the plastic chairs, casting the space in an ordinary and sad glow. Daniel sat in a far corner, a cold chicken sandwich untouched. He stared at it as though it were another dry financial report, stripped of any life. A small voice piped up, "Are you going to eat that? If not, can I have it?" Looking up, Daniel found Ethan standing there, both hands pressed against the table, round black eyes sparkling. The boy wore a t-shirt with a green dinosaur and jeans with grass stains at the knees. Daniel smiled faintly and slid the tray toward him. "I'm not hungry. Go ahead." Ethan plopped into the seat opposite, cheerfully dismantling the sandwich meat, then cheese, saving the bread for last. Daniel watched in surprise, as if the boy were performing some solemn ritual. "Mama says I eat weird," Ethan said between bites, "but I like tasting each flavor. Like music, you must hear every instrument before you get the whole song." Daniel froze. The comparison was too familiar. As a boy, he'd removed every toy to see how each piece worked. His mother used to say, "Daniel has the head of an architect." He swallowed, keeping his tone even. "That's really smart, Ethan. Not everyone thinks like that." The boy's eyes lit up, his grin wide. "You think so? Mama says I have a 3D imagination. I even drew a dragon hospital." Ethan dug a notebook from his pocket and handed it over. The pages were crammed with sketches, buildings with giant doors, elevators for dragons, pools for water dragons, test flight rooms for winged ones. Daniel flipped through, his chest tightening not only because of the boy's remarkable creativity, but also because he saw himself in every line. This was his blood. His dream was reborn in his child. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, hope shining in his eyes. Daniel nodded, voice thick. "I think you have real talent. If you keep at it, you can build the world you imagine." Ethan leaned back, satisfied, then grew serious, staring straight at him. "Mr. Daniel, can grown-ups say sorry? If they do something wrong, do they ever say it?" Daniel's throat constricted. Yes, grown-ups should say sorry too. But, he drew a deep breath, sorry isn't just words. You have to show it with actions. Ethan repeated it thoughtfully. Sorry has to be with actions. Then he grinned mischievously. "Mama says that too." Daniel chuckled softly, eyes stinging. The boy had no idea he'd just handed his father the most significant lesson. Ethan went back to scribbling in his notebook, then looked up again, asking innocently and knocking the air from Daniel's lungs, "Mr. Daniel, have you ever made someone sad?" Daniel froze, his chest clenched, his mind flashing back to Rachel crying in their apartment 6 years ago, her eyes breaking as he chose work over family. He wanted to say no, but those clear eyes across the table wouldn't let him lie. "Yes," Daniel admitted quietly, his voice low. "I made someone I loved very sad, very sad." Ethan propped his chin in his hands, then asked bluntly, "Did you say sorry?" Daniel stayed silent a long time before shaking his head. "No. I thought if I just stayed quiet and moved on, it would be fine. But I was wrong." The boy regarded him like a tiny judge, but his gaze wasn't harsh. Instead, it carried a strange purity faith that people could fix their mistakes. "Mama says," Ethan replied, "when you say sorry, You have to know why the other person hurts. If not, the words are just wind. Daniel smiled bitterly. You're wiser than most adults I know. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the clatter of the vending machine in the corner. Then Ethan tilted his head, asking suddenly, "When's your birthday, Mr. Daniel?" Daniel blinked, then smiled. "March 20th. What about you?" "December 15th. Ethan beamed proudly. "This year I'll be 6. Mama says 6 is old enough to start piano lessons." Daniel stiffened. December. He calculated quickly and staggered inside. 6 years ago, Rachel had left that very season. Their last night together, before his Tokyo trip, had been exactly 9 months before Ethan's birth. His hand shook beneath the table. Every piece had fallen into place. No doubt remained. Ethan was his son. "You okay?" Ethan asked, tilting his head, watching closely. "You look white as a wall." Daniel forced a smile. "I'm fine. I was thinking of something important." Ethan laughed, going back to his sketches. "Mama thinks a lot, too. Sometimes she looks at me like a puzzle she can't solve. But I'm not a puzzle. I'm just me." Daniel's chest tightened. "No, son, you're not a puzzle. You're the answer to my whole life." "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Daniel asked, voice light. "I'll be an inventor," Ethan declared. "I'll make a hug machine to cure sadness when people are sad. Hug boom. Better. I'll build a mobile hospital for homeless people. And I'll make sure Mama never cries again." The words hit Daniel harder than any shareholder meeting ever had a 6-year-old, already carrying his mother's burdens when he should have only known play. Daniel ached for the childhood he should have shared. "You're amazing, Ethan," he whispered, eyes wet. "You make your parents so proud." The boy grinned, reached into his pocket, and placed a small green plastic dinosaur in Daniel's hand. "This is Buddy. When I'm sad, Buddy helps me. You can keep him so you won't feel lonely anymore." Daniel's chest burned as he held the tiny toy. Such a simple gift, yet more precious than any billion-dollar deal. He nodded, gripping the boy's hand gently. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll take good care of Buddy." The boy yawned, rubbing his eyes. "I have to go back now. Mama will look for me. But tomorrow, you'll eat with me again, right?" Daniel's throat tightened. "If Mama says yes, I'll be here." Ethan smiled widely, then dashed off down the hall, his small frame vanishing. Daniel sat alone, staring at the plastic dinosaur in his palm. Inside him, an unspoken vow thundered. "No matter how long it takes, I will prove I'm worthy. I will never miss again." Seattle's afternoon was drowned in rain. Heavy drops battered the hospital windows, weaving an endless murmur. Daniel walked down the third-floor corridor, his chest weighed down. He had tried to keep a respectful distance, just brief conversations with Ethan in the cafeteria or playroom, but Rachel had clearly noticed. So he wasn't surprised when a nurse's message came. "Nurse Lawson wants to see you. Room 318. Empty." Inside, the room was dim, the air tinged with disinfectant. Rachel stood by the window, arms crossed tight over her scrub top. Her posture was that of a warrior, but her eyes betrayed tension. "What do you think you're doing, Daniel?" Her voice cut sharp as ice. Daniel stopped short. I only want to be near Ethan. He's my son." Rachel spun around, the words like a blade. "He is mine. For 6 years, I've raised him alone without a dollar from you, without a single call. You have no right to appear and wedge yourself in suddenly." Daniel faltered, searching for words. "I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had, I never would have." "Wouldn't what?" Rachel let out a bitter laugh. "Cancel a few meetings? Stop being CEO long enough to change a diaper? Don't lie to yourself. Back then, you chose the company, not the family. I believed the truth you proved." Her words pounded him like hammers. His mind flashed back to that final night, him hunched over a laptop, Rachel standing in the doorway, tears streaming. "You only build walls, not bridges." She had been right. "Rachel." Daniel steadied his tone. "I don't deny it. I was wrong. But now, I want to do right. Ethan is my son. I want to be in his life." Her eyes shimmered, but her voice stayed hard. "Do you think a few sentences erase 6 years? I carried him alone, gave birth alone, stayed awake all night when his fever raged, and worked double shifts to cover bills. Where were you? In a glass office tower. And now you want in because your conscience stings. Daniel's throat tightened. No, not guilt, because I've seen him. I've seen how bright, creative, and kind he is. And I realized I missed a miracle. Rachel trembled faintly but stood firm. Ethan doesn't need a father who comes and goes. He needs stability. I won't let you shatter his heart like you shattered mine. Daniel stepped closer, voice raw with resolve. I won't vanish. Not this time. If I have to prove it every single day, I will. The air thickened, broken only by the pounding rain outside. Rachel stayed silent, her breath uneven. For a moment, Daniel glimpsed not just anger in her eyes, but fear of losing the walls she had built to protect her son. Then prove it, she whispered at last, her words more challenge than concession. Don't talk. Don't promise. If you've truly changed, let your actions speak. Daniel froze. Prove it. The word rang like a verdict. He had spent years proving things with numbers, graphs, and financial reports. But here, those meant nothing. Before Rachel, only truth mattered. He had chosen wrong, and now he would have to start over. I will, he said slowly, each word heavy as stone. I'll be here every day, not to disrupt, but to show you I can be different. Rachel studied him long, as if searching for cracks in his words. Finally, she sighed, turning back to the window. You don't understand. Ethan is my everything. If you make him trust you and then leave again, I will never forgive you. And he will never recover. I know. Daniel stepped closer, voice low but steady. I don't want to hurt him. I want to be here for him and for you too. Rachel spun, eyes red. Don't say anything about me, she pressed, her words hurried as if afraid her heart might waver. I'm not that woman anymore. I learned to live without you. I rebuilt my world with only 2 hands and him. Don't try to push your way back, Daniel. If you truly want to be a father, focus on Ethan. As for me, leave me out. Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded. All right, I'll start with Ethan, but I can't pretend my feelings for you are gone. 6 years, and I still... Enough, Rachel snapped, tears breaking loose. She turned, clutching the bed frame to steady herself. You had your chance, and you destroyed it. Don't bring it back. The room fell silent. Only the rain and Daniel's thundering heartbeat filled the space. He longed to reach out and hold her, but her rigid shoulders were a steel barricade. He knew any touch now would only drive her farther. He stepped back, his voice barely above a whisper. I won't leave again. Whether you believe it or not, I'll stay. One day, Ethan will know who his father is not through words, but through everything I do. Rachel didn't turn. She wiped her tears quickly, spine straight, voice cold as stone. Remember this, Daniel. If you ever make my son hurt, I'll erase you from his life. Permanently. Daniel nodded. No protest, no defense. He only opened the door and stepped into the hall. Outside, the hospital glowed under the relentless Seattle rain. But inside Daniel, a new resolve surged. For the first time, his goal wasn't profit or reputation. It was to become the man Rachel could trust, and the father Ethan could proudly call his own. The path ahead was long, riddled with doubt and trials. But this time, he would walk it to the very end. Late autumn draped Seattle in its familiar gloom, skies the color of lead, drizzle falling softly on rows of maples just beginning to turn red. In that gray stillness, Daniel stepped for the first time into the volunteer office of Evergreen Medical Center. The small room smelled of coffee and paper. Behind a wooden desk stacked with files sat a short-haired woman in her 60s, her nameplate reading, Carol Whitman, Volunteer Coordinator. Mr. Mercer? She looked up, her eyes kind but shrewd. Yes. Daniel drew a deep breath. I want to sign up as a volunteer in the pediatric ward. Carol studied him for a long moment. The tailored suit, polished shoes, the face that had graced business magazine covers. She raised a brow. A man like you could just write a check and help this hospital. Why do you want to volunteer? Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. Because I want more than to write a check. I want to be present. Something in his voice shifted the air. Mrs. Whitman seemed to recognize he wasn't there to polish an image. She slid the paperwork toward him. All right, but remember this. These children don't need pity, and they don't need empty promises. They need patience and sincerity. If you can give them that, then you're welcome here. Daniel signed, his hand trembling. It felt like a door from his past had closed, and another opened. He was sent to help in the therapy room on his first day. A 7-year-old boy named Tyler was screaming, thrashing as nurses tried to administer antibiotics. 2 or 3 adults held him down, but he kicked and shrieked, "No, don't. I want to go home." Daniel stood by the doorway, his chest tightening. He saw Rachel inside, trying to soothe Tyler with gentle words. But the boy was lost in panic, unreachable. Then, to everyone's surprise, Daniel stepped forward. He lowered his voice, as though no one else existed but him and the child. "Hey, Tyler, that roar of yours is deafening. Are you pretending to be a dragon?" The boy paused, blinking through tears. "A dragon?" Daniel nodded, kneeling to his level. "Yes, dragons roar so loud they scare everyone. But you know what's funny? Even dragons can be scared of needles. They don't say it out loud." Tyler sniffled. "Dragons get scared? Of course. But they have a secret. Before they're shot, they imagine they're in the courage room. There, they practice doing one small brave thing, then another. By the end, they're strong enough for the needle. Want to try?" The boy hesitated, his eyes wavering. Rachel glanced at Daniel, stunned. The nurses stepped back, waiting. Daniel held out his hand. "You can start by just holding mine. That's already brave." A small, trembling hand slipped into his. Daniel smiled. "Great job. Now, look Mama Dragon in the eye and say, 'I'm ready.'" Tyler turned to Rachel, stammered, I'm ready." The needle went in. The boy flinched, tears spilling, but he didn't scream. When it was over, the room fell silent for a moment. Then everyone exhaled in relief. Daniel whispered, "You did it. You're the bravest dragon I've ever met." Tyler managed a shy smile, clutching his toy dinosaur. Rachel's eyes glistened. For the first time in years, she couldn't find words. Word spread quickly in the pediatric ward. The tech mogul had become a volunteer, and more than that, he had helped Tyler, the boy infamous for needle phobia, take his first injection without sedation. Some nurses scoffed, some chuckled, but many looked at Daniel with cautious respect. Rachel stayed silent. She didn't praise him, didn't scold him. She only watched with unreadable eyes, wondering if this spark would fade or a flame that could endure. In the days that followed, Daniel showed up every morning. He left his phone locked in the car, stepping into a world where contracts didn't measure time, but by children's laughter and cries of pain. He played endless board games with a boy in a wheelchair, losing every time so the child could bask in victory. He helped an 8-year-old bald from chemotherapy color flowers, listening as she explained that purple petals meant they wouldn't be sad anymore. He built wooden block castles with groups of kids, laughing with them when the towers collapsed. Sometimes he sat quietly in the corner, watching Rachel read stories to the group. Her voice still had the same warmth, but now it carried strength, the voice of someone who had survived loss. And he remembered her words in their old kitchen. "Not everything can be rushed, Daniel. Some things need time to bloom." He hadn't waited before, but this time he would. One late afternoon, Rachel found him folding paper cranes in the playroom. "Planning to turn this place into an origami factory?" she asked, her tone lightly teasing but edged. Daniel looked up with a small smile. "I just thought, each crane could be a wish. Enough of them. And maybe they'll bring a miracle." Rachel crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't need to do all this to impress anyone. We've seen plenty of volunteers come and go, bringing pity for a while before leaving." Daniel set the last crane down, meeting her gaze. "I'm not here to impress. I'm here to learn how to be present, for the kids, and for Ethan." At the mention of her son, Rachel stiffened. Her voice dropped. "Ethan is sensitive. He trusts too easily. If you walk in and then walk out, it will break him." Daniel nodded. I know. That's why I'm not walking out again. Something flickered in her eyes then, not trust. Not yet. But not pure doubt either. A hairline crack in the steel wall. Daniel was no longer clumsy with toy carts or coloring tables by the second week. He learned to talk with exhausted parents, when to stay silent, when to crack a joke to make them smile. Ethan sought him out often. Together, they built dragon hospitals, debated giant elevators and fire-safe chambers. Each time the boy laughed, Daniel felt like the world lit up. One evening, as Daniel prepared to leave, Ethan pressed a slip of paper into his hand. It was a drawing. A small house by a lake, 3 figures on the porch, a tall man, a long-haired woman, and a child. Beneath it, scrawled letters read, "Family." Daniel froze. He looked up to see Rachel at the end of the hall, watching. Her face was touched with emotion, but her eyes still guarded. In that instant, Daniel understood. His road wasn't only to stand beside Ethan and prove to Rachel that he wouldn't falter this time, and he was ready to spend a lifetime proving it. Seattle was darker than usual that day. Heavy grey clouds rolled low across the sky, warning of an oncoming storm. Inside Evergreen Medical Center, Daniel had just finished his volunteer shift, helping the children shape dinosaurs from modeling clay. Listening to their wild, hopeful stories, he felt a fragile sense of peace for the first time in 6 years. But it didn't last. The hospital loudspeaker crackled to life. Code Blue, pediatric ward. The urgent call thickened the air. Daniel shot to his feet, his heart pounding as nurses rushed toward the treatment room. Instinct drove him after them, until he heard a voice that stopped him cold. "Mama." Ethan's voice. Daniel's blood froze. Down the hall, a team of doctors and nurses surrounded a small gurney. On it lay Ethan's face flushed red, drenched in sweat, chest heaving for breath. The oxygen monitor numbers dropped fast, alarms wailing. Rachel ran beside him, gripping her son's hand, terror blazing beneath her mask of professionalism. SpO2 at 82. Oxygen mask. Now hurry. Daniel staggered back, trembling. It felt like something was tearing his chest open. The world blurred until all he saw was that small body, his son, fighting for every breath. The doctors wheeled Ethan into the emergency room. The doors slammed shut. Daniel lunged forward, but a nurse stopped him. "Sorry, only staff and direct family are allowed inside." He gasped, eyes blazing red. He wanted to scream, "I am his father," but the words caught in his throat. They bound him, 6 years of silence and absence, stripping him of even that right. Helpless, he pressed his forehead against the cold glass panel. Inside, Ethan was fitted with an oxygen mask. Rachel stroked his hair tremblingly, whispering comforts Daniel couldn't hear. Dr. Shah barked orders, and nurses prepared medications. The room moved with frantic precision, a dance between life and death. Each second dragged like an eternity. Daniel whispered hoarsely against the glass, "Son, don't leave me. I just found you." The clock's second hand stabbed into his chest with every tick. He lost track of time, only knowing that every monitor alarm inside tore his heart further apart. At last, the door opened. Rachel stumbled out, her blouse soaked with sweat, hair disheveled, face pale from strain. Daniel rushed to her, voice shaking, "Ethan, my son, how is he?" Rachel flinched, startled at those 2 words, "my son," falling from Daniel's lips. But she was too drained to argue. Leaning against the wall, she drew a long breath and said softly, "He's stable. Acute respiratory distress is a complication of the pneumonia that has not been fully cleared. He's on oxygen now, but he'll need close monitoring." Daniel sagged, gripping the doorframe, nodding repeatedly as though that motion alone kept him upright. Can I see him?" His voice cracked, nearly begging. Rachel studied him for a long moment. Anger still burned in her eyes, but beneath it lay exhaustion and a glimmer of understanding. Slowly, she nodded. "Just a few minutes. Don't excite him." Daniel pushed the door open. Ethan lay pale against the sheets, eyes half closed behind the oxygen mask, his small hand limp atop the blanket. Daniel sank into the chair beside him. "Son." His voice trembled, but he forced it steady. "I'm here." The boy's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. His lips moved weakly beneath the mask. "Mr. Daniel." Daniel clasped the tiny hand in both hands, warmth trembling through his skin. "Not just Mr. Daniel, Ethan. I'm your father." The boy blinked, trying to process. Then a faint smile curved his lips. "I guessed. Mama cried when she talked about you." Daniel broke. Tears fell hot onto his son's hand. "I'm sorry. Sorry for missing everything. But I won't leave again. I promise." Ethan lifted a finger with effort, brushing Daniel's cheek. "Don't be sad. I don't like when you're sad." And in that fragile moment, Daniel understood he didn't need court orders or paperwork to prove this bond. The truth lived in Ethan's eyes, in the small hand clutching his. Outside the glass, Rachel watched quietly. Tears slid down her cheeks, tears of pain, of relief. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But she knew. Ethan had just found the missing piece of his world. Beyond the windows, the Seattle storm broke, rain lashing the hospital walls. But in that small room, 3 lives were being rewritten into a chapter of truth revealed, and a fragile chance to begin healing. 3 days later, rare sunlight broke over Seattle. Golden rays slipped through the pediatric ward windows, falling across Ethan's sleeping face. His breathing was steadier now, his skin less pale. Beside the bed, Rachel leaned back in her chair, dark circles under her eyes from nights without rest. Opposite her, Daniel sat slumped in a wrinkled shirt, tie discarded long ago. Both were exhausted, yet neither would leave. Every time Ethan stirred, both parents leaned in at once, 2 satellites orbiting the same small Sunday. That morning, Ethan stirred awake, pulled off his oxygen mask, and croaked hoarsely but clearly, "Mama, I want pancakes, with lots and lots of syrup." Rachel laughed through tears. "You're still weak. First porridge, then pancakes." The boy pouted, turning to Daniel. "Daddy, tell Mama to let me have pancakes." The word Daddy rang out sharp and clear, tightening and bursting Daniel's heart in the same instant. He nodded quickly, voice trembling. "Yes, when you're stronger, Daddy will make pancakes for you. I promise." Ethan smiled, satisfied, and drifted back into sleep. The room fell silent again. Rachel sat upright, her gaze on Daniel. In her eyes, anger was no longer the only thing. There was fatigue, caution, and the faintest flicker of trust being reborn. "You told him," Rachel whispered. Daniel nodded, unflinching. "I couldn't hide it anymore. He needed to know, and I needed to hear him say it. Just once, and I could die without regret." Rachel's hand clenched. "You don't get to die. Ethan needs a living father, not a ghost of broken promises." Daniel met her eyes, voice firm. "I am alive. And I'll live not for the company or reputation, for him, for you, if you'll let me." Rachel said nothing. A single tear traced her cheek. For once, she didn't wipe it away. The wall inside her heart cracked a little more. A week later, Ethan was discharged. Dr. Shah gave detailed instructions, medications, diet, and follow-up visits. Rachel jotted everything down diligently. Daniel stood beside her, listening intently, determined not to miss a word. The day Ethan left the hospital, Seattle was still cold, but pale sunshine spread like a sign of a new beginning. Daniel offered, "Let me drive you both home. My car's in the lot." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. In the back seat, Ethan hugged his toy dinosaur Buddy, chattering about building Dragon Hospital 2 inches the living room. Daniel kept glancing in the rearview mirror, soaking in every word like music written only for him. At Rachel's small apartment, Ethan had dozed off. Daniel gently lifted him, the boy's warm, fragile weight against his chest, filling him with both joy and regret. He laid Ethan on the bed, pulled the blanket up, and whispered, "Daddy's here, son. I'm not going anywhere." Rachel watched silently from the doorway. The sight twisted her heart. For 6 years, she had done everything alone. But at this moment, it was clear. Ethan needed not just a strong mother, but also the arms of a birth father. That night, Rachel and Daniel sat on the tiny balcony, and Ethan was asleep. The yellow glow of a street lamp lit their faces. No distance separated them anymore, only the weariness left after a storm. "You've changed," Rachel said softly. "I can see it, but I'm still afraid, Daniel. Afraid one day you'll choose the company again over family." Daniel didn't rush to answer. He looked out into the night, then back at her, voice resolute. "I've had everything, money, power, fame, and it meant nothing without you and Ethan. I don't need an empire anymore. I need a home. If you'll allow it, I want to start again. Not from the beginning, but from where we stand now." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. She turned away, but Daniel gently took her hand. It trembled, but for the first time in 6 years, she didn't pull back. In that quiet, something tender settled between them. No grand promises were needed, just presence. Just a hand held. Just the dawn breaking on the horizon. Inside the room, Ethan stirred, hugging Buddy close, whispering in his sleep, "Daddy, Mama, I love you both." The words floated like the perfect ending. A family once broken was finding its way back, imperfect, yet real. And in that small apartment in the rainy city, a new dawn began, one of love, patience, and second chances.